Alright, today we're going to show you how to replace the brakes on this 1997 Honda CRV. The tools we're going to need today is 2 vice grips, a flathead screwdriver, and of course your replacement brakes. The way you know when your brakes need replacement is if you start to hear or feel any grinding sound, as well as a loss of power in the back. You'll notice here, this is the old brake. You can see how thin it is. The new brake, obviously there's more material. So the first step to do is go ahead and jack the car up, get ready to pull the wheel off. Alright, now that we got the wheel off, go ahead and take the drum off. Should slide right off. Perfect. Now you can see the two, as the drum brake, so you see the 2 brake pads here and one over here.
Okay.
Alright, for the next step, we're going to go ahead and place a vice grip right here. Make sure that shoe doesn't slip too far and overextend that piston on right there. And then we're going to take off this spring right here that controls the e-brake.
What I'm going to do...
Okay, now that we've got the spring off, we went ahead and take off this mechanism right here, off of that part right there.
I pull apart with the screwdriver that we were talking about.
Yep. You're going to pull that clip off right there to pull that axle out.
Come on.
Just use your screwdriver to go ahead and split that pin apart and then slide it off the axle. Alright, once you got the cotter pin off, go ahead, there's a washer right behind the pin that's holding the axle on. Once you have that out, you can go ahead and slide the axle, the little pin on out. That'll allow the drum brake to come off. So one thing you want to be careful of is that if this boot slides, or this brake pad slides too much to the right here, what will end up happening is this little this piston will slide out and take this rubber boot off. You want to protect these. These are keeping all the dirt and grime from getting in those pistons and letting your brakes leak. So after you get the pin loose in there, you can go ahead and loosen this spreader here. That we'll go over what that does later in the video when we put it all back together. Once you have that little roller rolled all the way down, that expander is going to collapse down, allowing you to pull the spring off. The spring's attached right over here and goes up the back side of this shoe, attaches. You can see it sticking out right there. Alright, this is where your other pair of vice grips come in handy. Go ahead and get a good grip on the wire there down the bottom, holding on the bottom shoe, and go ahead and pull it to the right and out. It should pop right out if you do it right.
Yeah.
Also, one thing I forgot to mention, why do we have another set of vice grips over here? That is because you don't want this shoe to expand out and, like we said before, let that piston expand too far out. So putting a pair of vice grips on the outside of the drum, right there on the lip, prevents the shoe from going too far out and overexpanding that piston.
Okay, and you're the...
Once you have the spring out, it should pop right out of there just like that. You can go ahead and pop the spring all the way off, undo it from back there, take off the spreader, then you should be able to pull the whole thing apart. Yeah. So one more step you're going to have to do is you're going to have to take off these shoes right here that hold the brake shoes against the backing plate. They are a simple spin and they'll come right off. Here's what it looks like once you get it off. Just so you're aware, that little device that we just pulled off, where'd it go? Oh, this guy right here. So you'll look, it expands down, so when you go to take it off, if you push it in a little bit, and you can rotate this little guy right here so it'll fall through that slot and come out. Boom. And then once you undo the spring and you've undone those back holder clips, the brake pads will just come right off. You don't have to worry about the springs that were down here on the bottom. It just falls out. So once you have that top spring taken care of, everything just falls right off. I should have recorded that. Oops. Alright, one important thing to note on this is that pin right there is only on one of the brake shoes. That pin needs to be on the top brake shoe because that will hook onto that little metal piece that I showed you before that we pulled off. So make sure the one with the pin goes on the top. So this right here is for your emergency brake. There's a cable that goes through and goes up the backing plate and then up to your e-brake. So when you put this together, what you want to do is you want to have the brake pad actually go in front of that metal piece, and they kind of slide together like that. Don't screw that up because you would hate to have your e-brake not work. Go ahead and put the clip back on that little axle that we talked about a little bit before. Use a pair of your vice grips and squeeze it back on there.
Somehow.
Just like that. Almost. Alright, once you have the pin put back on, you can go ahead and slide the whole assembly back up against the back plate, and then use those clips we pulled off just a second ago and put them through that pin, push them back up against the back plate.
Just like that.
Little retaining pin in place, good to go.
I get it.
With the bottom one clipped on under the back plate and good to go, you can go ahead and lift the brake pad up and put the next one through. Keep in mind that little spring down there, don't forget it. It holds the two brake pads together. Alright, for these pins, there's a little trick here. You're going to want to take those same pair of vice grips, pinch the very end here, and then that pin that sticks through, you can actually push on it on the back here. So you're going to push on that pin with one hand, take your vice grips, push against the back plate with your pin, and then the center one will pop through, and you can rotate it and clip it into place. Not too bad, but it takes a little bit of coordination. It really helps to know that you can push on the pin from the back to steady it.
Now we got it.
Alright, this next part is the part that's the hardest about the whole thing. Don't be too nervous, but you gotta be a little patient. So this spring right here that pulls the two brake pads together is pretty stiff. So you're gonna wanna get a good grip on it and then pull it down to that hole down there. Before you pull it down there though, this spreader has to be in position. So the thing we found works best on the other side is to have the spreader in position, locked into place. Oh, I just pulled it apart. You have the spreader in place and in one piece, and then go ahead and put the spring in place. Alright, so now the spreader's in place. You make sure you want the long side, the long end of it on the outside closest to you, as well as, don't forget, the brake pad actually sits in the piston. There's a slot in that piston right there. Make sure it sits nicely right in there so that you don't have to, it won't fall off. Alright, the next step, once you have the spreader in place, you know your brake pads are in the piston slots. That big fat spring, go ahead and do the side that's behind the brake pad first. Get it through that loop right there, and then pull it down into the slot in the bottom one. Alright, like I said, this one requires a little bit of patience. What you want to do to make this go well is make sure the spring is through that hole right there, the spreader's in place down there, and the spreader's in place down there. I like to expand it out just a little bit, helps keep it in place. Once you have 1, 2, 3 things in position, grab a hold of that part of the spring with your pliers, pull on it, and put it in the hole there at the end. And you're pretty much done. Now what you're going to do is put the hub on, and we'll show you what you do with that. Oh, I almost forgot. You have to put the adjuster on. This guy goes on over that pin right there and sits just like that. Then we're going to put the spring on that goes from there down to there.
Yep.
Alright, it's going to look like when it's all put together. Got the spring down there, goes up to this mechanism, engages with that roller right there. Alright, once that's all done, now we put the hub back on. Alright, the trick here is what you're going to do is once you have the hub back on, you're going to go ahead and spin it back and forth. You see how it spins really easily with right now? It spins too easy, we pull the hub back off, adjust that spreader out so it spreads the brake pads a little bit farther when we put the hub back on. And then we see if it spins. If it doesn't spin anymore, then we know that it's a perfect tight fit, but we want to have the wheel spin, of course, so we pull the hub back off, loosen it just a couple turns, just a quarter of a turn or so, put the hub back on, you're good to go. So the drum brake sack back on, spins just about the right amount. I stopped it, pulled it off, loosened it, put it back on. It's right where I want it. So now we put the tire back on, and we torque the lug nuts down. Just as a reminder for safety, make sure you torque your lug nuts down the proper amount. Those bolts those studs that stick out are stressed just perfectly. There's a safety factor on them, but of course you want to torque it to the manufacturer's spec. 80 foot-pounds for this Honda CRV. Check your manual to make sure you do it your right spec. Alright, just like that, we've got new rear brakes on our Honda CRV using only a screwdriver and 2 vice grips. Let me know if you have any questions. Be sure to like and subscribe. My good buddy and neighbor Mike here and I are going to try and do more of these videos. If you have anything that you're requesting, radiator, engine, whatever, let us know and we'll see if we can help you out.